welcome to today's deep dive. Usually when we talk about learning the ropes of a new hobby or a new science, there's this really comforting expectation that there are established rules.
Right, the conventional wisdom.
Exactly. It's like moving into a brand new state-of-the-art house, right? The inspector hands you the manual, points to the vents, and says, the central air is perfectly calibrated. You will always have exactly the oxygen you need.
Yeah, and you just trust the blueprint.
Right. You trust it. But then you walk into your pristine new living room, and suddenly, despite what the manual says, you find yourself sprinting to the window, just desperately gasping for air.
Which is a terrifying scenario, honestly.
It totally is.
Yeah.
And we are completely surrounded by these, invisible blueprints that govern the systems we manage every day. But what happens when reality just flat out contradicts the textbook?
Well, that exact tension between theoretical rules and physical reality, that is where the most vital learning happens. Because, an aquarium, which is what we're looking at today, isn't just a glass box of water.
No, not at all.
It is a delicate, highly reactive biosphere. And when it crashes, the root cause is rarely just one single obvious failure.
Yeah, and that brings us to our source material for today. We have this really fascinating set of detailed real-world notes on a closed-system aquarium crisis. And our mission today is to see how tiny, seemingly invisible variables can compound into a literal perfect storm.
It's a great case study.
It really is.
Yeah.
And just to be clear up front, we're zeroing in purely on the biological puzzle and the environmental content detailed in these fishkeeping notes. We're stripping away the author's background to focus entirely on the science of the tank.
Right, keeping it purely on the ecosystem dynamics.
Exactly. So let's get right into the baseline fact here. The source notes established that cichlids, which are, a wildly popular type of aquarium fish, they generally do not need air bubbles from an air stone.
Right.
The conventional wisdom is that they pull dissolved oxygen naturally from the ambient exchange in the tank.
Yeah, and in a standard setup, that ambient oxygen exchange handles the biological load just fine. You really don't necessarily need a mechanical pump aggressively forcing air into the water for them to breathe.
Right.
That is the established, comfortable baseline that everyone operates on.
But then we hit the anomaly. The notes detail two specific exceptions that were introduced to this tank. The golden Mbuna, scientifically known as Melanochromis auratus, and the giraffe cichlid, or Nimbochromis venustus.
Okay.
And a few days after being introduced to the aquarium, the observer finds these specific fish huddled at the very surface of the water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have rapid gill movement. They are actively suffocating.
Which completely shatters that baseline rule we just talked about.
Totally.
You have this direct, undeniable conflict between what the established knowledge says should be happening and the actual physical distress happening right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to that analogy of the state-of-the-art house. It's like being told the central air is flawless, but you're gasping at the window. And let me push back on human nature a bit here.
Sure.
If the general rule says these fish should be absolutely fine, how dangerous is it to assume the rule is right and your own eyes are wrong?
Oh, it's an incredibly dangerous cognitive trap. And honestly, we fall into it all the time across every complex management scenario.
Really? Like even outside of fishkeeping?
Oh, absolutely. When the textbook says one thing and reality says another, we experience this profound cognitive dissonance.
Right, like our brains just reject it.
Exactly. We assume we must be misinterpreting the situation, or, we assume the system will just magically self-correct because the underlying math says it should.
Because the manual offers safety.
Yes, manuals offer safety. But in a living, breathing system, delaying action because you are deferring to a theoretical rule, that can be fatal. I mean, visual evidence of rapid gill movement isn't a theory. It is undeniable physiological distress.
And because they were visibly suffocating, the owner didn't have time to, research or run a peer-reviewed study. They panicked.
Which is the natural human response.
Totally. Their immediate instinct wasn't to question the oxygen rule, but to assume something toxic had invaded the water.
Yeah, that human instinct to look for an invasive enemy is so strong. When we see distress in a system, we almost always jump to the most complex, malicious conclusions first.
Right, like it's a poison.
Exactly. We think it must be a hidden toxin, it must be a complex pathogen or some rare disease. We want to wage war on a chemical level.
Which is exactly what happened here. Yeah. The source notes detailed the observer going into absolute overdrive to fight this invisible enemy.
What did they do?
Well, they do a massive 80% water change.
Yeah.
They add aquarium salts. And they administer a chemical medication treatment called methylene blue.
Wow.
And let's just pause on the sheer physical scale of an 80% water change. You are siphoning out almost the entire environment, hauling buckets, trying to temperature match the new water. It is a wildly aggressive, disruptive reset of the entire habitat.
It really is. And think about what that represents in a broader management context.
Okay, how so?
It is the equivalent of a company executing a massive traumatic corporate restructuring because productivity dipped without ever stopping to ask if the employees are just burned out.
Oh, man. That is such a good point.
It's a massive disruption based on an untested assumption. By focusing purely on chemical toxicity, the observer completely bypassed the most fundamental physiological need, which is just basic oxygen availability.
Right.
We skipped the foundation to investigate the roof, basically.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If you replace 80% of the entire environment and you dump in salts and you add medical-grade chemical treatments, and the result is total failure, like the fish are still gasping at the surface, doesn't that imply the problem isn't what is in the water? The problem is what is missing from it.
Exactly. The failure of those complex fixes forces a return to the absolute basics. What's fascinating here is how the initial fixes actually blinded the troubleshooter to the physical reality of the tank.
Yeah, because they were so focused on the chemistry.
Mm.
But then the notes describe the observer literally rummaging through hoarded, forgotten fish-keeping accessories until they find an old air pump and some plastic tubing.
Going back to basics.
Right. They drop the air stones into the tank, plug it in, and almost immediately the fish settle down.
Really? Gel like that.
Just like that. Stop gasping at the surface. The crisis is instantly neutralized.
See, that is a purely mechanical solution, completely overriding a chemical panic. The air stones provide definitive proof that it wasn't a disease or a toxin. It was just a mechanical lack of dissolved oxygen.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Why did these specific fish, the golden Mbuna and the giraffe cichlid, need those extra bubbles when the general rule says cichlids shouldn't? What was actually happening in that water to make it so unbreathable?
That's the real puzzle.
It is. And the source notes provide this brilliant breakdown of the environmental science. So let's look at the physical environment of this tank. The notes log the temperature at 26 to 28 degrees Celsius.
Right, which is roughly 79 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And, temperature is the invisible baseline for everything in an aquatic system.
Okay, because it changes the water itself.
Exactly. Physically speaking, the temperature of water directly dictates its capacity to hold gas. Cold water molecules are packed tighter together, and they move slower, which traps dissolved oxygen really effectively.
Okay, makes sense.
But as you heat that water up to 28 degrees, those molecules gain kinetic energy. They vibrate faster, the bonds loosen, and the dissolved gases like oxygen literally escape into the atmosphere.
Wait, so just by being warm, it's losing air?
Yes. Simply by running the tank at that temperature, the water is actively rejecting the oxygen. The baseline capacity is fundamentally suppressed.
Wow. So the water itself is holding less air just by existing. But that's just factor one, because looking at the top of this tank, even if the water could hold more oxygen, the notes mention a plant called duckweed, completely covering the surface.
Ah, the duckweed.
Yeah, and wait, I need to pause here because I'm genuinely confused by this detail.
Sure.
If aquatic plants produce oxygen through photosynthesis, shouldn't a thick mat of green duckweed be pumping more oxygen into the water? Like, shouldn't that be helping?
You would absolutely think so. And that is a very, very common mechanical misunderstanding of how aquariums breathe.
Really?
Yeah. Plants do produce oxygen, but the primary mechanism for an aquarium's oxygen exchange isn't plant photosynthesis, it's surface agitation.
Meaning the actual breaking of the water's surface tension.
Exactly that. When water moves, ripples, and splashes at the surface, it exposes continuously new molecular surface area to the air.
Right, right.
This agitation physically breaks the surface tension, allowing toxic carbon dioxide to off-gas and fresh oxygen to dissolve in. A thick, unbroken mat of duckweed acts like a physical lid.
The physical lid.
Yeah. It eliminates the surface ripples entirely. It basically seals the tank off from the atmosphere, preventing that crucial gas exchange.
It's literally putting a lid on a suffocating environment.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have warm water that can't hold much air sealed under a plant lid that prevents new air from entering. That's two massive factors. And then who is living in this sealed box?
Right, the biological load.
Yeah, I'm looking at the biological load in these notes. There are 17 golden Mbunas shoved into this single space along with the giraffe Cichlid. 17.
Which is a lot, because every single living organism in that tank is a consumer of oxygen. 17 Mbunas represent a massive constant drain on an already depleted resource. Just basic arithmetic. You have a high biological load dividing into a severely restricted oxygen capacity. You are operating at a massive deficit before the fish even start moving.
And the movement is the next piece of the puzzle, right? Because the notes focus heavily on the behavior of these golden Mbunas.
Yeah, they are not a calm species.
Not at all. They are described as having a hyperactive nature, dealing with severe territorial stress, and engaging in intense mating rituals inside this overcrowded tank.
Well, behavior dictates biology. Golden Mbunas are fiercely competitive. When an animal is hyperactive, aggressively defending a tiny patch of gravel or attempting to mate, its heart rate spikes.
And when the heart rate spikes,
Its metabolism revs up, and its oxygen demand absolutely skyrockets. They aren't just passively existing in the water, they are burning through oxygen at an accelerated rate because the social dynamics of the tank demand constant vigilance.
they are burning fuel faster while the supply is completely choked off. But there's one more detail in these notes that honestly blew my mind, because it's just the cruelest twist of irony. Remember the methylene blue?
Oh, yes, the chemical intervention tax.
Yeah, the chemical medication the observer added in a panic to try and fix the water quality. The source notes point out that this specific fish medication actually depletes oxygen quickly.
It does.
How does a medicine designed to heal actually suffocate the patient?
Okay, so methylene blue is a highly effective chemical compound used to treat fungal and parasitic infections. It works well for that. However, it functions fundamentally as an oxidizing agent.
Okay, an oxidizing agent. What does that mean in the water?
When it enters the water, it undergoes a chemical reaction where it acts as an electron acceptor. And without getting too bogged down in the complex chemistry,
Please don't.
the vital takeaway is that this reaction interacts directly with the dissolved oxygen in the water to do its job. It literally binds with and consumes the remaining free oxygen as part of its chemical process.
That is wild. It's like it's literally eating the air to do its job.
Yes.
It's like a manager stepping in to help a struggling, overworked department by instituting a mandatory daily 3-hour progress meeting.
That is the perfect parallel.
Right. The fix is the exact thing consuming the last bit of the team's operational bandwidth.
Exactly. The intervention tax. The very treatment meant to save the fish was rapidly accelerating their suffocation.
Okay, so let's look at the big picture here. Any one of these factors on their own probably wouldn't be lethal. The general textbook rule about cichlids not needing an air stone probably holds perfectly true if you only have one or two of these variables.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if the water was cooler, or if there was no duckweed, or if there were only 3 fish instead of 17.
But all of them simultaneously created a lethal bottleneck. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a masterclass in how cascading failures happen in closed systems.
Right.
You have suppressed supply from the heat, blocked replenishment from the duckweed, chemical depletion from the medication, and hyper-accelerated demand from the territorial stress all happening at the exact same moment.
It's literally like putting 17 highly competitive, hyperactive athletes in a sauna, covering the only air vent with a thick blanket, and asking them to run a marathon.
The math simply broke down.
So the crisis is averted in the short term. The emergency air pump is running, the bubbles are flowing, and the fish have stopped gasping. But, you can't just leave random tubes and wires dangling clumsily in a habitat forever.
No, it looks terrible and it's not sustainable.
Right. So now that the exact physical mechanisms of the crisis are understood, how do you implement a long-term fix? Like, how do you treat the root cause in a way that integrates seamlessly into the habitat?
Well, this is the pivot from emergency triage into thoughtful environmental design. Because usually when we fix a problem, we just bolt the solution onto the outside of the system. We leave the ugly scaffolding up permanently.
Yeah, we just patch it and move on.
Exactly.
But the source notes detail a really ingenious architectural implementation for the long term. The current fix involves placing those life-saving air stones inside ceramic or PVC pipes. And these pipes are positioned at the bottom of the tank to serve as affordable artificial caves.
Which is brilliant, because this raises an important question about environmental design. By doing this, they are addressing two of the compounding factors simultaneously.
Yeah, the notes say the behavioral results have been incredibly promising. The fish haven't just stopped gasping. They are swimming freely and actively choosing to hang out near these new, bubbling artificial caves.
So let's look at the mechanical genius of this first. An air stone inside a vertical pipe acts like an airlift pump.
Okay.
It creates a strong, highly concentrated upward current of bubbles and water. This column of force shoots to the surface and violently shatters that duckweed barrier we talked about earlier.
Oh, so it forces a hole in the lid.
Yes. It clears a permanent opening in the plant lid, restoring the crucial surface agitation and driving oxygen deep into the water column. It fundamentally and permanently fixes the physical oxygen deficit.
It breaks the lid. But biologically, it's doing something even smarter. Because it's not just a pipe, it's a cave.
Exactly. By placing the aeration inside a physical shelter, the observer directly addressed the biological stress. Golden Mbunas are intensely territorial, like we said.
Right.
In a crowded glass box, a lack of hiding spots drives their stress and their metabolism through the roof because they are constantly exposed.
Needs to feel vulnerable.
Always. By providing PVC and ceramic pipes, the observer created defensible territories. They gave the hyperactive inhabitants a safe place to rest, breaking lines of sight and lowering the baseline aggression of the entire tank.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the whole picture, it means a temporary, frantic emergency fix was transformed into a structural behavioral feature of the habitat.
It became part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, they didn't just solve the mechanical oxygen problem. They actually lowered the oxygen demand by understanding the inhabitants' behavior. They improved the holistic quality of life.
And that is the ultimate goal of managing any ecosystem, whether it's aquatic or human. You want integrated interventions that serve multiple purposes. A single, elegant solution that lowers behavioral stress while simultaneously repairing the physical environment.
This deep dive has just been such an incredible journey. From trusting assumptions to blind panic to pure physical science and finally to, elegant environmental design.
It really covers the whole spectrum of problem solving.
It does. And we've seen firsthand why trusting your direct observation, actually looking at the gasping fish, must always override the textbook rules when the two conflict.
Right. We've also highlighted the immense hidden danger of compounding variables. A massive system collapse is rarely the result of one catastrophic mistake.
Like, it's never just one thing.
No, it is usually the silent, invisible agreement of 5 or 6 small, seemingly harmless variables working together to choke off a vital resource.
And the most expert way to counter that silent agreement is by designing solutions that address both the physical supply and the behavioral demand of the system at the exact same time.
Because honestly, whether you are managing a team of people, overseeing a complex software project, running a small business, or just trying to manage the daily chaotic dynamics of a household, you are managing an ecosystem.
Absolutely.
The rules of physics and biology scale up remarkably well to human dynamics. You have to continuously watch for the hidden taxes on your system's oxygen, whether that oxygen translates to your team's time, your project's budget, or your family's emotional bandwidth.
And sometimes the very medication we apply to fix a perceived problem, a new strict corporate policy, a micromanaging oversight tool, an aggressive schedule reset, that might actually be chemically depleting the remaining oxygen in the room.
Yeah, you have to look at the whole board. You have to look at the temperature, the surface barriers, the crowding, and the stress, all interacting at once.
In this deep dive, we saw how a layer of harmless-looking duckweed and a slight temperature increase nearly suffocated an entire vibrant ecosystem, despite the manual saying everything was perfectly fine.
It's a powerful lesson.
It really is. So, as you go into your week, look closely at your own closed systems, your own state-of-the-art house. What invisible duckweed might be quietly suffocating the environment you manage every day?